Hey, sixth graders. Today we're going to talk about how we can collect data in order to get a good representation of whomever it is that we are trying to get information from. So this is really a lot about surveys, and I know a lot of you have probably taken surveys, or certainly your parents have. And sometimes you get emails asking you to voluntarily take a survey. Other times you're kind of forced to take a survey. So we're going to talk about the different kinds of ways that we can collect information from people. So the first thing we need to talk about is a thing called a population. Because the population is the entire group of people or objects that you are studying or surveying. And a sample is just a subgroup of the population. So for example, we could, if we want to know about U.S. citizens, all of U.S. citizens is a population. But then we could narrow it down, and we could look at just the homeowners in the United States. So let's say we want to know how many people own a house that costs more than $200,000. We would survey all of the homeowners in the U.S. who aren't all of the people in the U.S. They're just one subgroup of all of the people in the U.S. Similarly, we could take a look at all of the students at Mason Prep. And if we just wanted to survey the sixth graders, that would just be a sample. That's one subgroup of all of the students of Mason Prep. You guys make just one little part of Mason Prep. And we use samples to make inferences or conclusions about the larger population, because oftentimes, I shouldn't even say sometimes, oftentimes it's not possible to survey all of the people in the population. So we use samples when the population is too large, when it might be too expensive, too costly. Like let's say you're mailing out surveys and you're paying for the postage. That would be really expensive if you were sending a letter to every single person in the United States. That would cost a lot of money. So it could be too expensive, or it could, quite frankly, just be too time consuming. So let's say instead you try picking up the phone to survey all of the people in the US. That would take you pretty much forever. That would be way too time consuming. So that's why we don't survey all of the people. We usually just take a sample. And also lastly, it's usually impossible to reach all members of a population. For instance, let's say within a year, you want to survey all of the US citizens. Well, within a year, people are dying as well as people are being born. So how do you make sure you hit everyone? It's just simply not possible. So I want to talk about four ways that we can create samples for ourselves, or these smaller subgroups. So a simple random sample is where everyone in the sample has an equal chance of being selected. So one way you could do this is literally by using a random number generator. So you could assign each person in your population a number and then literally use a number generator. You could put everybody's name into a hat. Another example is, put names in a hat. But the thing is, everyone has to have the same number of entries. Every name has same number of entries, because that's what makes it even and equal for everyone to be selected. We have another one called a systematic random sample. I like this the best because I really like systems. I like when things kind of make sense and have order and structure to them. And this is when the sample is selected by using a specific interval or sequence. So for instance, I could survey every fifth person who enters the building. So let's say I'm at the library and I want to know people's favorite books. I could survey every fifth person who walks into the library, or I could survey every fifth person who walks into the grocery store. Or I could pick any place really and just survey every 10th person, every fifth person, every second person. Just depends on how many people you want to survey. A voluntary sample, this is when people, this is self-explanatory, when they volunteer themselves. So this sample involves only people who volunteer to take the survey. So it's when it's optional. So you might send out a survey via email, and most people will incentivize the surveys because a lot of people usually don't want to take the time to fill out a survey if there's nothing in return for them. So a lot of emails will say, hey, fill out our survey and you'll enter for a chance to win an iPad or something like that. That provides people incentive to actually take the survey. But this is where people voluntarily take it. They're not forced to take it. And then there's a thing called a convenient sample, and this just is simply like, what is the most convenient way to get the information? So this sample consists of members of the population who are easily accessed. So for instance, I'm going to give you a project, a survey project, and if you just literally looked around you and surveyed the, 5 people sitting close to you, that would be called a convenient sample. It's not random, and it's probably going to be, as we're about to learn, a biased sample, because it's not a good representation of everyone if you're just kind of doing the most convenient thing. Okay, so let's talk about this thing called biases. So when something is biased, it means that people probably lean toward a certain type of answer or have something in common, or it just isn't a fair representation of your whole population. So a biased sample is not representative of a whole population. So we usually don't want to have a biased sample if you want a true representation of the whole population. So for example, if I wanted to know people's favorite sport and I go to a school and I only ask the athletes, that's pretty biased because these athletes are probably going to pick their sports that they play, and they obviously have a strong relationship with sports or a strong tie to sports. So you're not really getting a whole feel for everybody and what everybody's favorite sports would be. And then on the flip side, you have an unbiased sample, and and that is indeed representative of the entire population. So it's a good representation of everybody. So for instance, back to this, asking people about their favorite sports, if we asked all of the students at school what their favorite sport is, or if we ask every 10th person who enters school what their favorite sport is, that's a better representation of the whole population instead of only asking athletes. So in general, the samples that we talked about before, a simple random sample, systematic, voluntary, and convenience, lend themselves to biased and unbiased samples. So unbiased ones, the good ones that we like because we like getting a good representation, that would be simple random. So a simple random sample and systematic. That will truly give you a random subgroup of your population that will lead to an unbiased sample. But then on the flip side, a biased sample is voluntary, because usually people who volunteer to take your survey care about whatever it is that you're asking them, so that kind of makes them biased. And then the convenience sample is also biased because you're not getting a good representation of everyone. So let's go through these examples just so we can make sure we have a firm understanding of what's happening with populations and samples and biased and unbiased. So it says the following statements are populations. Determine what a representative sample could be. So people living in a specific neighborhood, we could take a sample of people with a pet. People with a pet in the neighborhood, because that is one sub